So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mary Lee Kiernan. I'm the president and CEO of YWCA Greenwich, and thank you for joining us this evening for our event called Beyond Petitions and Protests, the Art of Becoming an Authentic Ally. We're thrilled that you've joined us. Before we go one step further, I would like us all to just take a moment, have a moment of reflection and silence to show respect for George Floyd, for Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Eric Garner, and so many other Black lives that have been cut short by the violence born of systemic racism in our society. So thank you for taking this moment. Thank you for doing that. And again, welcome to everyone. The mission of YWCA Greenwich and YWCAs across the country is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And I do want to give a shout out to about a dozen YWCAs across the country that have joined this Zoom this evening. You know, that mission and this moment in time really require not only honest and uncomfortable conversations about race and systemic oppression, but also action, authentic steps that create change. The YWCA has always designed and provided community events and conversations like this that examine systemic racism and strengthen our community's capacity to work against oppression. And some examples include our events on sex trafficking, labor trafficking, hate speech and hate crimes, the intersection of immigration policy and racism. And we deliver diversity, equity, inclusion training to our members, and we just started doing that in our community before the pandemic hit. And tonight, we are committing to ramping up this education even further. But it goes beyond education, as we know, in capacity building, to include policy advocacy and systems change that we've always worked on. Tonight and going forward, we're also committing to double down on that ongoing work across sectors in our community and our state to change the systems that oppress and segregate Black lives and all marginalized groups. So we hope you will join us in those efforts. Before I introduce our speakers, I do want to thank Craig Jones at Greenwich Point Marketing for his help executing this event. Craig is really the wizard behind the curtain right now in all of the public Zoom meetings for our local government, and we're really grateful for his support, so thank you, Craig. At the end of the discussion, everyone should know that we will be taking questions. To submit a question, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and type in your question. You can do that while the conversation is going on, before the Q&A starts, and of course when the Q&A begins. Your question will remain private, and we're going to do our very best to answer as many as we possibly can. And this discussion is being recorded, so it'll be available in the next few days for people who could not join us this evening, in case you want to share it with friends. So now it is my privilege to introduce our esteemed guest. Denise Hamilton is the founder and CEO of WatchHerWork.com, a digital learning platform for professional women. At WatchHerWork, Denise has archived the professional experiences of hundreds of women in order to build a library of over 6,000 videos with one goal in mind: closing the gap for today's professional women by giving them the advice they need and when they need it. And Denise is a much sought after speaker and trainer, and she does speak frequently on the experiences of women of color. Welcome, Denise. And Jenna Arnold. Jenna is an American businesswoman and serial entrepreneur. She is best known as the co-founder of Organize for her work at the United Nations and most recently is one of the national organizers of the 2017 Women's March on Washington and all over. Jenna is the Chief Impact Officer at an impact venture fund, Rethink Capital Partners, helping to shape the fund's plan for meaningful and measurable impact across education, community, food, and women-led companies. And her new book, so relevant, so perfect for tonight's discussion, is called Raising Our Hands: How White Women Can Stop Avoiding Hard Conversations, Start Accepting Responsibility, and Find Our Place on the New Frontier. And the book asks white women to have a radical and honest conversation with themselves about race and about privilege and identity and power, and how they can use their influence to take an active role in creating a better future. So welcome, Jenna. Thank you for being with us. So Diane's Books in Greenwich has generously agreed to donate 20% of sales of Jenna's book to YWCA Greenwich, and we'll provide contact information for Diane's at the end of the event. So thank you, Denise, and thank you, Jenna. We are so thrilled that you have joined us this evening. These two wonderful ladies appear together frequently, so we've invited them just to have a dialogue, to unpack these issues and share how we can make authentic change in our own communities, in our own lives. So ladies, I'm going to turn it right over to you, and we'll go to questions at about 8 p.m. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm so excited to be here, to be with you. This is such an amazing time. It's such a complicated, rich, fabulous, horrible. There's so many different words about this time. And I appreciate you hosting this conversation, because giving space and passing the mic is exactly the central to the activities that is going to make this situation change, just reality change.
Mm-hmm. Just to echo Denise's sentiments, we're really excited to be here. Denise, does it make sense for us to jump in? I appreciate Mary Lee mentioning that we do have a lot of these conversations in these types of forums, and we also spend a lot of time on the phone with each other having these conversations in private. And so it might as well, as we workshop through things together, to call more people in so we can all do this together. All right, so one of the things that Denise and I spend a lot of time talking about is the different roles that people should and shouldn't be taking in this exact minute on this page of our collective history. And there's clearly a large amount of desire, ambition that might be bubbling up in ways and places that we haven't seen, surely not in the past 6 months, maybe not in the past century. And one of the things we keep talking about is like, who should be doing what, where, and when, given that it changes every hour. And Denise, I would love to ask you or hear from you how people, and particularly white women, can be the best ally in this moment.
Such a good question, and quite honestly, one of the most important questions of the time, right? Because racism, systemic racism, is not a Black problem. Quite frankly, it's a white problem. And one of the things I love so much about your book and about the approach that you took in the book was the notion that, you have to assert your power in the places that make the most sense. And the places that make the most sense are the places that you have authority, have influence, have the ability to change behavior and change what happens, right? And so I will be very honest with you. New allies scare me. New allies scare me. There have been a lot of new allies that have come to this fight, and they're fired up and they are excited and they're so sad. Like, they want to help, they want to be a part of this battle. But I think that even in that experience, you still have to be respectful, and you still have to understand the fight was here before you got here, right? And I think some people are acting like they discovered justice, like Christopher Columbus discovered America, right? Right? Like it was here before you got here.
There's definitely a discovering of something, that's for sure.
Yes, definitely, like, oh my gosh, did you guys know? And we're like, actually, we did know. We did know that this was like this. So I think that there's an energy around, what do I do? What do I go? Like, and unfortunately, for white people, it's a very different experience than for me as a Black person. As a Black person, I always have to navigate white experiences, white emotions, white feelings. If I have an interaction with the police, I become the peacekeeper, right? I'm responsible for managing whether or not that escalates. Like I always have to manage, like, don't make any sudden movements in the store. They're gonna think you're stealing. Don't run down the street because they're gonna think you're running from some interaction. I've always had to manage and monitor myself around how white people feel about me. White people have not had that experience. So there is when we talk about I love this title of Beyond the Picket Signs and the protests, like that's important, but now the real work begins. Your work begins. Like there are people who are really excited about changing the world, but they're not so excited about changing their world, right? And so you want to be an ally. To me, like that's the place to start. And the truth of the matter is, when you've been the hero and the center of every story, it's difficult to kind of pass that baton. Mm-hmm. When you think of yourself as, I've got the great ideas and I know how to help, I know what to do, it's difficult to come in and be a foot soldier and not step into the role of the general. It's just difficult. And so there are some allies that come into these spaces in the pole position instead of coming in with humility. Who's been doing this work? What's the research? What can I get involved in? I see 5 million nonprofits starting and I'm like, well, there are nonprofits that were already doing this work. People struggling to figure out how, what initiatives should they be getting behind? Guess what? There's people who have whole reports and whole lists on initiatives you can get behind. So I think that it starts with a healthy respect of the people that are in the place already, the people that have been doing the work and anchoring there, and then not, quite frankly, centering this work around yourself. And that's really hard. That's harder than it sounds, because you have to defer. One of the things that, as you can imagine, you can even hear in my voice, I'm a little bit hoarse today. I've been having a lot of conversations about this, and people have been asking me a lot of questions. And one of the hardest parts of these discussions has been managing the emotions of other people. I find myself comforting them instead of them jumping in like, how can I help? What can I do? It's, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I could, and I don't want to, I'm not mocking that grief, but what I want, just think about that. Think about the responsibility of comforting to be reversed. And so I think that it's being aware and sensitive to the fact that this story is not about you. You do not have a leading role in this story. You're in the cast, and you can add such incredible value in the cast, and that's uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Denise, you have a line, I'll ask you to recite it. If you can manage your tears.
I'll manage my anger if you can manage your tears. And I say that because I am a little angry. And I think it's important to hear this, and those of you on the call, like, I hope that I'm talking to you like we're all grown-ups and we can all hear hard, straight things. Because if you came to this conversation, it's because you want to be better and you want to authentically step into this space. So I'm going to operate under that assumption. So I'll tell you a hard truth. Not all Black people will welcome new allies. Some people are angry about new allies. I have not watched the George Floyd video. I didn't need to see it because for me, it was a rerun. I've seen it before. I can list all the names. I know all the hashtags. And there's a little piece of me that's angry. Like, why did you need to see it, right? Why did it take so long? Why now? Why do we care today? And it makes people distrustful of new allies. So in a lot of ways, I have to manage that emotion to welcome you into the space to help me fight this fight that I can't fight without you. But it's important to understand that if I already have that concern of like, why are you here? And I'm suspicious or distrustful of that because it feels to me arbitrary. It really does. It feels like, why was this any different than any of the other times? If I have that anger and I don't manage it, this conversation doesn't move forward. But if you have tears and grief and sadness, that's really centered around how sad you are, about how you feel, about how sad, about your shame, your guilt. I don't require that of you. You can put that down. Let's meet in the middle. And my goodness, if we could get together, if we could really like work together on these issues, what couldn't we do? Black women and white women, oh my gosh, amazing, right? So I think that there's a meeting in the middle that we've got to do to be good allies and to welcome good allies. So I say, I'll manage my anger if you manage your tears.
Deal.
Deal.
So a couple of things that I want to spend a little bit of time with some of the language that you used. I'm not clear how everyone is coming into this conversation in terms of where they are on whether or not this is their first conversation about unpacking biases, or if this is their first Zoom call related to what's happening in the state of the world. My hunch is that if you're showing up here, you've been very diligent over the past couple of weeks paying attention to what's been happening. And we'll talk about why now might be a little bit different a little bit later. But I did ask Denise the question about allyship and what that means. And one of the things that I'm encouraging my white female peers to consider is not this idea of like labeling about whether or not one is an ally. And then there's a bunch of other different quote unquote roles: activist, advocate, accomplice. It goes on and on and on and on. And I think one of the dangers that we get in sometimes this idea of like trying to classify ourselves. And instead of trying to figure out exactly whether or not I am being a good ally, or if I'm not being a good ally, or what's the rule right now, or what should I not be doing? Am I supposed to be posting the black square and the hashtag, oh shoot, wait, I'm not supposed to be doing it, and sort of this constant like fluid, like I'm not sure how and where to step in, is an interesting gauntlet for us to navigate, because this moment is different. It's very different than it was 3 weeks ago. I assume that the way Denise would answer that question 3 weeks ago would look different than at this specific hour on this specific day. And one of the things Denise and I had a public conversation about this almost a week ago, and we were talking about how to engage our friends that represent marginalized communities. And at that time, it was just check in and say, I'm thinking about you, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not sure that sentiment exists a week later, meaning... right like there's been okay, we get it, we get that you're here now and you're paying attention now, but there's this constant sensitivity around an extraordinarily 600-year, people are saying 600-year-old crisis and genocide and horror show. And I've been quoting Denise a lot in this concept of it's been a rerun. What happened to George Floyd is no different than what's been happening time and time again. I have a little bit of a hypothesis that something that jarred white folk awake a bit differently in this moment had to do with what Amy Cooper did in Central Park when she had taken her dog off leash, and a gentleman, Christian Cooper, of no relation, who was bird watching, had asked her to put the leash back on the dog, and she had then proceeded to call the police on him. And we can unpack why I think it is that she did, and that kind of sort of performance and those roles and reactions, particularly as a white woman who's marched in many of the women's marches over the years and would identify herself as a progressive, liberal white woman who, previously would say things like, I'm not racist, or I'm not any of these kinds of things. And one of the requests that I have of my community is, instead of us just staying stuck in the space of trying to figure out whether or not somebody is or isn't racist, or a system is or isn't racist, that we all take that deep breath and recognize that we all have racial biases, anti-Semitic biases against girls with blonde hair who wear glasses, and biases against women who sit in front of bookshelves. That this idea that because we've been born and raised in these United States with those textbooks and those very specific narratives and that very specific blueprint that we were supposed to follow, that we have a set of beliefs already. It's how the brain scaffolds information. So instead of debating whether or not you are an ally or not an ally, or you are racist or aren't racist, let's just put all of that labeling to the side and just sit back and start asking yourself the really impossible questions of, what is it that I'm doing to continue to perpetuate harm? How am I upholding systems, be it the white supremacist system or my biases against my neighbor, that could potentially result in me knee-jerking calling the police? Some people, like those few days right after Amy Cooper, before what happened in Minnesota, white folk would be like, I would never do that. That's not me. And I found myself saying, are you sure? Are you sure you wouldn't do that? Because I wrote a book, 112,000 word book, and I'm not sure I wouldn't do that. And so taking that space to say, okay, who am I really? And how am I participating really? I would argue is the work that many of us have to do in parallel to following people like Denise.
And I think too, like, what's a racist, right? Like, I don't think we have a really good working definition. I think we think a racist is a mean person in a KKK hood using the N-word. And the truth of the matter is, it's like water. We're like fish in water. We don't even see the systems and the places where racism shows up because we can look away. We have the comfort and the convenience to be able to look away. And so there's not that sensitivity to all of the places. But there's an exhaustion that Black people are sharing and verbalizing right now that is it's so hard to communicate because it is ever constant, ever present. Someone who waited and got on the waiting list for 2 years to get their kid in the right preschool because preschool education matters, but votes against Head Start. Right? Like, so it's important for your kids, but it's not important for my kids. Who says, we live in a meritocracy. Do we? Because the top 1% of households, it's about 1.2 million households in the United States, 96.1% are white. That's statistically impossible. You have to construct that. You look at Congress. You have to protect it. You have to look at Congress, look at our elected officials. How is it possible for this to be so white male dominated? It's not, unless it's intentionally structured that way, right? So we create these situations that create a second class of people, and then we penalize them for being in the second class. Two men in this case go to war, fight in World War II. One comes back and gets the GI Bill, one comes back and is locked out of the GI Bill.
That's right.
So the one with the GI Bill gets to buy a house, right?
In the zip code with the schools.
Exactly. So they get to buy a house. So then let's move to the next generation. So the next generation has a house left to them from their father. If they married somebody, the other person got a house from their mother. They combine those resources, and now they can buy a big, beautiful, fancy house that they didn't let my father buy, right? And then redlining creates a whole space that even if I put my little pennies together, I'm paying 10%. When my mother bought her house, her interest rate was 11.75%. Shocking. That's violence. That's like, we're so concerned. The violence of the murder is horrible, but there's violence all around us, right? And so now we're going to build school funding on what? Property value.
Right.
It's ridiculous. Then we're going to say, oh, those people, they're so inarticulate. They really can't they're so undereducated. They're so, what? Like, right. What are you talking about?
Right,
what are you talking about? You get exactly what you sow. You reap exactly what you sow. So like, we have to be honest and look at these situations of, deciding who we are in these situations. And there's a great othering of racism. Racists are other people. Other people do racist things. I don't do racist things, but clutching your purse when the Black man gets on the elevator, getting off because you don't want to ride with him, following, somebody in a store because you assume they're going to steal. Like, these are the things that make up our lives. And I'll share a quick story with you. And it's important for me to share the story because I think people see me with my fancy master's degree and my color-coded bookshelf, and they think these things don't happen to me. They happen to other people, right? So when my daughter was around 9, we lived in Abilene, Texas, and we were driving, she and I, from Abilene to Houston. And a cop pulled us over. So I knew at that point I hadn't done anything wrong. I knew that I'm pretty meek, and my bark is worse than my bite. Like, I'm not a troublemaker. And so I pulled over. Officer, is there a problem? What can I do? And he said, get out the car. Well, why do I have to get out the car? It's night. I'm here with my daughter. Like, what is it that you want? What am I being accused of? What is the problem? He wouldn't answer. I get out the car and he says, do I have your permission to search the car? Now, everyone on this call is clear. Of course you don't have permission. Of course you have no reason, no probable cause. You haven't given there's not a drug dog. You don't have any reason. You literally stopped a random car on the highway. You have no right to search my car. But as so often happens in these situations, I have to become the peacekeeper. Mm-hmm. I have to give up my rights in order to maintain the peace. How did that happen? So I had to make the decision, okay, fine, go ahead, search the car. I don't know if he's gonna plant something. I don't know what's gonna happen, but I know I have to keep this situation from escalating. And so I say, go ahead, search the car. He tells me and my daughter to lay face down in the dirt on the side of the road for his protection. Me and my school-age daughter are face down in the dirt on the side of the highway. I don't know how many white women that happens to. It didn't matter what my achievements were, my master's degree, my appearance on media, my blah, blah, blah. None of that mattered, right? When it comes down to it, he had complete power over me and he abused that power. And I wish that was my only story, right? I have a million stories. I have a million stories of my brothers and their experiences. I have experiences in my own neighborhood of being stopped by the police. What brings you to this neighborhood? Is there a neighborhood that I'm not allowed to drive in America? If somebody came from Sweden and rented a car and drove through this neighborhood, would they be allowed to do that? Yes. Why can't I be here? So there's a relentless nature to this that I want people to understand, because this is a battle that requires a level of stamina that the likes of which we've all never seen or never experienced. And it's important, I think, to be really clear of how much work this really is, how many different places this shows up and rears its ugly head, and to not do it all, but pick your corner, your space. There's a part of us that needs to divide and conquer, right? And just pick the thing that you're going to work on, whether it be early childhood education. You said something so brilliantly earlier. You talked about like this uncertainty and this unfamiliarity and this being new territory. Think about how a Black student going into a predominantly white college feels. A Black professional going into an all-white office feels. I live in that constant state of navigating somebody else's, stuff. And welcome. Like I say, welcome, right? And build the stamina that's required to do that work. And I think that the opportunity is vast, but you can't work on 75,000 things at a time. You got to pick the space that you can be impactful. Hey, we don't have enough diversity at our school. Hey, we really could get behind these non-white political candidates. Hey, we really could, work on this space of admissions to the Ivy Leagues, or figuring out funding, or figuring out the digital divide, or VC funding. Like, we all have a space, a piece of this that we can pick up. But I think the thing that's really important to understand is, again, that whole concept of this being in water. Like, it's all around us. And while that is overwhelming, it's been overwhelming for me my whole life.
Right. So I always joke with Denise, because whenever we start talking, my sticky pad explodes. It's officially out of control. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm sorry. I think it might be worth talking a little bit about my hearing that story from you for the first time, and what other people might be thinking, and this idea of what you started off with related to the othering is, I'll start with the othering. When I started this work, it's because a number of extraordinarily generous, primarily women of color in my life had sort of flicked me and were like, you don't know what you don't know yet. You're not seeing something that I need you to. And it wasn't like, let's have a sit down conversation, talk about your explicit bias. It was a comment that I made. It was a microaggression. We call those things microaggressions. It was a microaggression that I heard that I had said here and there, and they'd be like, no, that's not adding up. And what happened initially when I heard them say, and it was a comment related to, I forget exactly, but it was something like, oh, well, I don't see color. And I remember my friend's response. And I sat on it for like a year, and I had festered all of these arguments, all of these responses that I was like, oh, well, let me explain to her that I see everyone the same, and equality, and my parents, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And I saw that, I feel like on Monday and Tuesday, where there was a lot of people, a lot of white folk who were like, oh, well, let me solve this argument for you, and let me say something that clearly has never been said in response to any sort of racist or gender-based or disability-based statement. Like, I'm going to get you here. And so there was a part of me that was like, okay, if you're in anywhere in the first 20 years of your work on this, any argument you come up with or any excuse or unpacking has already been heard, and just and so it was very quick to other that my friends at that time must have been talking about those other white people. And I think in this moment, there was, at least in the past couple of years, it was very much those other white supremacists who are carrying the Pier 1 tiki torches in Virginia, who are walking into our synagogues, or the ones that are very clearly not me. And one of the things that I'm holding myself accountable, and it's the only thing I can really offer and share to those who might have similar life experiences to me, is that I'm doing everything I can to recognize that I'm the other, that I don't, that I would prefer and have been working very hard to pretend is somebody else. And so what also happened as you were telling me that story is heart rate, I was having physical response, and my initial instinct was if I saw that, I would physically probably intervene and start freaking out, right? And I would have that privilege to start yelling at the police, "What are you doing to Denise and her baby? What do you mean? No, you can't. No, that doesn't work." And I would probably get a little hysterical because I've been allowed to get hysterical. I've been allowed to break the peace. I've been allowed to challenge authority in ways that, and this is where I get nauseous when I say this, sometimes I have physical responses to this kind of conversation, is where you and your daughter have to have your face in the dirt. I would have the complete 180 opportunity to go in and then get physical with a police officer, screaming in his face, doing everything to break the peace, while you and your baby are in the grass trying to keep it. And that kind of like, that balance of like, where we as a Black woman and a white woman find ways to, I don't want to talk about defunding the police because that's a separate conversation for other experts who know what they're talking about. And it's a fascinating conversation that we all need to participate in and pay attention to. But this idea of like, where do we come in and wrap our arms around almost like that power in the middle? How do we find ways to control what's harming you, and that control, and sort of using my privilege and power to sort of control that gray on your behalf, I think is what I'm trying to stumble through.
It's a brilliant question, because I think that's what's so exciting about this time, right? That's why I've been doing this work. That's why I tell these stories. It's because I think that when you have the power and the privilege to tell the police off and to tell him how it's going to go and to stand up to him, it is really hard for you to believe that I don't. Because you're talking to me and you know how powerful I am, you know how smart I am, and you know how whatever. So what are you talking about? Of course, you just don't let them search your car. If that was me, I would have done this. And like, you don't know what you would have done. I didn't want my child to be in foster care.
Right.
I knew that literally I could have made 3 different moves and my child would have spent, and I don't know about you, I don't want my child to spend 1.2 seconds in foster care or sitting in a police station in some town in the middle of nowhere in Texas. So I had to make this choice of like, I had to live to fight another day. And that sounds so dramatic if you've never experienced it. That's why it's important to tell the stories. That's why I'm trying to be a part of these dialogues, because if you don't understand, you can't help me. Right? There's a fundamental understanding of the problem that you've got to have that I don't know that I've seen as much as I've seen it in the last few weeks. Like when we talk about, for example, Ahmaud Arbery, here's a guy running down the street. He's jogging in the middle of the day. 2 guys in a truck, like hit him, chase him with the truck and kill him in broad daylight in the middle of the street. And you think that's the worst part of the story.
Right.
And it's really not. 2 months, more than 2 months later, the video leaks and then national pressure comes into the situation and the McMillans are arrested. But let's talk about that. Let's really think about that. Let's really think. How many people had to be a part of that cover-up? The people in the neighborhood, the cops that came on the scene, the district attorney offices, 1, 2, 3, that all declined to prosecute. Everybody in this little, they all had to be complicit. For me, racism is always a system. It's never a person. Amy Cooper can't be Amy Cooper unless the police let Amy Cooper be Amy Cooper, right? So it's never an individual for me. It's always a system. And so when we have that fundamental disagreement, well, then we're looking for a bad person. She wasn't racist. She just made a mistake. I love that narrative of, well, she just made a mistake, or we shouldn't ruin her life because she just made a mistake. I'm like, she could have killed that man. She could have caused the death of that man. And we don't even have a law to address her. We don't even have a law, right? So I think that there's this notion of before you take a step into this space, learn what the problem is. Understand the problem is it's not just a bad person that we've got to root out. It's a system that we have to shake loose. We have to rattle. We have to make this different. And we need to do it immediately because we know it when we see it, right? So people are very clear that the cop that kills George Floyd is horrible. He's terrible. But when you saw Eric Garner's video, did you ask, well, what happened before? Well, what could he have done? He must have done something right? Like, so you can think it. Derek just did what you think, right? And so you have to assess like the parts of you that protect the status quo. And it's really tempting to protect the status quo. Y'all are having a good run. It's really tempting. But allyship that doesn't cost you anything is worthless to me.
That's right.
It's worthless.
I again, a full note filled out. So, you know, one of the things that I keep thinking about is if we talk about what happened with Ahmaud, and that one in particular has me pushing my community, because Denise, you talked about the systems, right? The police department, the DA, all of these systems that we built over the centuries to checks and balances. That's the whole point. But what I'm wondering is, and I thought their last name was McMichaels, and I could be wrong, but I'm referencing the people who are accused of or who murdered Ahmaud. I want to know where their neighbors were for the past decade. I want to know the people who were sitting next to them in church.
Yeah. When it was kind of like everybody in town knew they had done it. And I'll also add to that, you know, whenever I have conversations like this, or whenever I'm not sure where to anchor in a story, I change the nouns. Right? I change the nouns. I just say, if the characters were different in this story, how would it play out? Right? Can you imagine a universe where a sweet little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl was jogging down the street and two black guys came up in an SUV and hit her with the car, chased her down the street, cornered her. She slapped one of them to get away and they shot her. And they may not even make it to the jail, let alone be in jail that night. Like, you can't even imagine it. And then my favorite detail of the story, it's a small detail, but his body laid in a street for hours. Can you imagine a universe where a white woman's body would lay in the street for hours? No, you can't. And if you can't imagine it for you, why would you do it for them? Why is it okay for them? Why is stop and frisk okay for me and my brothers, but it's not okay for you? Can you imagine somebody coming into the Starbucks, grabbing you, throwing you up against the wall, searching your pockets, taking your purse, dumping it out, going through it, and then saying, okay, go ahead, go back to work. Go. Like, you can't even imagine that.
Do your Wall Street example.
Like, I always think stop and frisk is such a good example of, it's just like the physical embodiment of racism, right? Because we say it's to stop drugs, right? Like, that's why we're doing it. Guns, drugs, we want to get them off the street. So we're going to stop and frisk random people. Unconstitutional, but okay, we're going to do it because of the greater good of getting these things out of the city. Have you ever seen a movie about Wall Street that didn't talk about cocaine? Have you ever seen a TV show about Wall Street that didn't talk about cocaine? Every single one, without exception. I challenge you to find one that doesn't. So we all know that cocaine use on Wall Street is rampant. So why don't we stop people on Wall Street?
Or in private school parking lots.
Or at your neighbor's house when they're serving 200 kids underage alcohol.
Right. So.
Right? But so it's the same behavior. We've criminalized it over here, and it's totally normalized over here. That's racism. And you know it. You know it. If you stop and you think about it, you know it's not fair. So two kids, one black, one white, commit the same offense, and the black kid goes to jail for 9 years, and the white kid's dad can call the mayor. Right. And you know that's how it is. So then we judge that person. Oh, he's got a criminal record. He can't go to this school. He can't work at this job. He can't be in this environment. But then we say, gosh, those black people they commit so many crimes. What is he supposed to do? Like, let's just be honest. Let's challenge ourselves to not be right. That's such a big piece of this, right? I want to be right. I want to believe this is a meritocracy. I want to believe the stories that I've been told. I want to believe that I did this myself. Yeah, I inherited my house from my parents, but I did this myself. Yeah, my parents paid my tuition for me, and I don't have any student loan debt, but I did this myself. Yeah, my parents bought me my first car, but I did this myself. You didn't do it yourself. You did it with help. And God bless you. I celebrate that you did it with help, but then don't look down on me because I'm in debt, or I can't afford this neighborhood, or my kids are stuck in a crappy school, or be honest. Be honest about the part that you play in how our lives honestly, legitimately are. Okay. And if you're honest, then we can fix it. But we can't even touch it until we're honest.
So I'm looking at the clock and we have 10 minutes. I asked you only 1 of 5 questions I had teed up, and I have 7 things I want to make sure that I get out before we go to questions.
Perfect.
Okay. The first one is, you talked about the GI Bill and redlining, and it's in my book, but this is how I cheat and take notes from what's inside the book because I can't remember. So the GI Bill declined 1.2 million Black veterans the same kind of housing and educational subsidies, and they gave them to 8 million white veterans. White families own 90% of the national assets. Black 2.6, Hispanic 2.3. Right? That's us protecting power. And so sometimes people will say things, okay, well, so what am I supposed to do? Give up my house? And so I'm a little bit like, just take a deep breath. But it's probably not that, but it's when you call someone to get your kid into Georgetown or into that private school, or when your kid gets caught with the fake ID, because we all have them. And you just run into the jail, pay bail, pay the fines, hire the lawyers, get it wiped from the record. That's how we're protecting power. That's how we're protecting reputation. And, I'll often hear, and I'm not asking anyone not to work in the best interest of their children, but I think the question becomes is like, how are you paying attention to what else is happening around you when you do go get your kid after he's had his hand slapped at the local jail for having a fake ID? Who's sitting behind them in the jail cell?
And how are you using the systems that are harming another person against them?
How are you bending them for your benefit?
I was brought in to consult with an advertising agency that has no minority representation at all. And I said, where do you get your interns? Well, we really look for interns that have had other really great internships, and they've really,
right.
How do you get the internships?
How do you get that internship?
My friends right? Like, you see how it's a cycle? So let me get this straight. I can be a straight A 3.95 student. I am working 2 jobs to put myself through school. I am taking care of my younger siblings and my disabled mother. You're not interested in me because I don't have the sexy Google internship, right? Those are the spaces and the times where it really shows up, that we are punishing a group of people and elevating ourselves, right? And I think it's really, really incredibly important to challenge yourself, challenge what you do, look around your own space. And I think Jenna's frozen, but I think it's just incredibly important to look around your own space and look around for the opportunities where you can do that. You're back. Good. Yeah, you don't have to give up your house, but you definitely can bring a Black intern in. Definitely can support a young professional in your team. You definitely can make sure that you're promoting people fairly. Like, there are so many other places for you to fully show up and be really helpful. Oh, I think we lost her. The other thing, I'm sure she'll jump right back in, but the other thing that I think it's important to really pay attention to is that we're just people. We love our children the way you love your children. We want good things for our lives, and we have hopes and dreams, and we want the same things that you want. And when you are perpetually locked out of that, I want you to imagine the frustration and the rage and the disappointment that is every single day, and account for that. So when people say, oh, Denise, so how do you feel about set-asides and quotas and I'm all for them. Get help people get an opportunity, help people start businesses, help people buy homes, help people get their kids a good education, help people elevate themselves. That to me, if your intention is there, you are capable of being so impactful in other people's lives.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, sorry about that. There's a couple of things that I want to make sure that we get to before we go over to questions, particularly when you were saying, like, be really honest. And one of the things that I talk a lot about in the book is this idea of cognitive acrobatics, and the way that we are doing backflips and cartwheels and convincing ourselves that I like to say we make excuse, right? We're better at unloading the dishwasher, putting the kids to sleep, buying all the Christmas presents. Oh, and that's just how my husband behaves, or boys will be boys. So this idea of being able to stop making excuses and stop pretending shoot, I'm getting another signal that's saying that it's unstable, and I apologize if it's a bit wonky. But this idea that we are just making excuses for ourselves.
Yeah, and that's normal, right? Because you don't want to be wrong, and nobody wants to make a decision that is basically signing up to be taxed, right? Because that's really what we're talking about, right? Am I willing to give stuff up? Am I willing to share, right? And it's very comfortable to share stuff that doesn't cost you anything. Like, hey, why don't you take over my Instagram for a day? It doesn't cost you anything, right? But it's a nice gesture. Right? It's nice. I'm not saying it's not a nice gesture. And if anyone wants me to take over the Instagram, I'll do it. But I just think, like, where the rubber hits the road is, where am I going to sacrifice? What changes am I willing to make? What changes to the structures? How am I opening up my life so that I can help this group? Like, if once I've made this acknowledgement that, this is not right, what am I prepared to do around that? And understand that that's expensive.
Yeah, it's going to be. And I think it's unclear about what that's going to look like moving forward. So in addition to catching yourself every time you're doing a backflip and making an excuse for Uncle Bob or your husband or your son, or boys will be boys, or that's not me, that person was racist, or I would never do something like that. Instead of trying to figure out and identify exactly what you would or wouldn't be doing, I think it's important to take a look at other people's behavior and try to find in what circumstances you might potentially do the same thing. I also think something that Denise said previously, which was really important, is this idea, particularly right now, is as people are trying to get into the conversation and aren't quite sure how to do it, recognizing, one, that we've already caused harm and that we're going to continue to do it. I have 4 words that I encourage people who might look like me and have, like I said earlier, similar life experiences, and as they engage in difficult conversations with people who represent marginalized communities, that if you do mess up, you say, "I'm sorry. What else?" And no one's interested. Like when my husband shows up late from work and we decided he was going to be home at 6:45 to do the kids, and he walks in the door and he's on the phone and he's like, "But I walked in the door." And he's like, "So I technically got home at 6:45. I'm like, "But you were on the phone for 10 more minutes after you walked in the door, so you weren't present." I'm not interested in the excuses. The correct response is, "I'm sorry, what else? What else can I do?" And it's also okay if they're like, "I have no idea." Like, move, right? And so we're in that phase.
Normalize that, as a matter of fact, normalize. It's okay to say, "I don't know."
Yeah.
Like when did it happen that we can't say, "I don't know" anymore? Right? Everyone is an expert on every subject. I don't know.
That's right. That's right. And there's such freedom in not knowing, particularly around this subject. One, it means that the people who actually do know, right? Like I certainly don't know anything about defunding the police. And so sitting in an unknowing position means that all this other information just flows right in front of me that I get to sit and observe and be a diligent student of. Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm of the hypothesis that the white supremacist patriarchal structure that either said to you, you're either the leader or you're the follower. You either are the knower or you don't. You're either good or you're bad. And all of those binaries, we have to strip down. And that's to Denise's point, is that this is not okay, I'm going to read a couple books, I'm going to listen to a couple podcasts, I'm going to show up to a couple of Zoom calls. When Denise says this is going to very literally turn the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we operate in the world, and then what that world looks like on its ear, it is that serious. Mm-hmm. It's why there's that big of a risk that, as far as I'm concerned, hasn't yet shown up, right? Some of the more extreme white supremacist communities, they are too silent for me right now. Mm-hmm. They are too quiet for me right now. Mm-hmm. The gutting that we are being asked to do on ourselves and of the world is going to very literally either save our species or be the end of it.
It sounds about right. Sorry, and that's why like the shame and the guilt.
We don't have time.
I don't have time. I don't even need that. I don't require that. I don't want you to, I'm so sorry. My grandfather owned slaves, my great grandfather. Like, those comments are just like, they mean nothing to me. I don't require them. If you need to cleanse your soul, but I don't require them. I require your active, I want to radicalize you, right? Like, that's what I want to do. I want you to work. We joke all the time. I want some of that Mothers Against Drunk Driver energy. I want some of that.
Can I see the manager, please?
Where it's like, here's this thing that we think is impossible to change, and we're going to gather ourselves so we can change it. So much so that we don't even remember a time that we didn't have those laws. We don't even remember the time before. What did we used to do before, right? That's what we need. That's how we're going to have systemic change. And part of the reason that we're a little hung up, and we've been hung up, is because we had this large swath of the population that, quite frankly, didn't believe it. They didn't think it was this bad. They didn't think it was this serious. Well, now you know. Let's go. Let's get to work. Let's change the world.
All right, let's do it. I'm in. My hand is raised.
I'm in.
On brand. I'm not admittedly totally clear on how much time we have. I am noticing that participants are dropping a little bit. So obviously, we welcome you rolling away if needed. I have some of the Q&A questions. There's 4. If other people are interested in contributing, Mary Lee, I don't know how you want to navigate this.
I mean, First, I just have to thank you both. It was, just raw and honest and powerful. And we're so grateful for this conversation. I don't even want you to stop. Can you stay with us all night and talk? I mean, it's so important, and you're just doing it so beautifully. So yeah, we have some Q&A here. And so let me just go through, this one has come up a couple times, which is, do you have suggestions for a call to action? Just
I'm so glad you
wanting sort of specific steps and really want to make a difference.
Yeah, start. People keep waiting for a checklist or this wonderful to-do list that you can schedule out in color-coded blocks on your calendar. And it's just start. It's read the books and listen to the people. Make sure you have authentic relationships with the Black people in your life. Make sure you have Black people in your life and talk to them. Ask them, what can I do to support your business? What can I do? You think about we just had the PPP loan to help everyone, and 90-something% of Black people were locked out, right? Mm-hmm. Like, these are the nuts and bolts ways that every day racism manifests itself. So I don't know that you need don't wait for a menu to order from of the space and the thing that you can start. Like, just start. Lead with your intention, and all of the ways they'll present themselves. I really believe that. I really believe that the ways will present themselves if you're an honest seeker of the truth and you're really looking to be of use. Then you'll present yourself as useful with humility, right? Because I'm so sure, I think you could sit for 5 minutes and figure out a place that you can get involved if you really apply yourself. And I was talking to a group of kids this morning, and I said to them, if you can figure out the college admission process, you can figure out racism, right? You learn what you need to learn. You figure out what you need to figure out, no matter how alien or crazy or kind of antithetical to like normal thought a process is. You will master it if it gets you what you want to get. Bring some of that energy to this problem. So yep. No menus, no checklists. And there are a lot of people that are giving out checklists. But I just personally feel like that's not the way to approach it.
That's right.
The way to approach it is lead with your heart, be honest, look for the spaces, start with you, look for the spaces that you can be impactful, and then those other things will manifest. Some of us have a maid and don't know her last name. Don't know if her kids need help paying for school. Don't know how she's doing since all this went down. We know the places that we can be impactful. Choose to be impactful, and you will be.
I'd love to add a couple of things to that as well. Denise said, don't put this on your to-do list. Like, this is something you're ever going to be able to check off. Like, I'm the crazy color-coded to-do list type, and I don't have on here be a good mom. I don't have on here be a good citizen. I don't have on here be a good Christian, Jew, whatever it is that I'm doing that day. And so this idea that this is going to be something we're just going to be able, I'm great. I'm a great mom until I snap at my kids because I've asked them to brush their teeth 4 times. So this idea of we're constantly checking ourselves and constantly finding ways to get better. I would say that I'd love to see more white folk concede more quickly and say, I don't know what I don't know. Let me sit back and listen. I'd love to see more white folk say, I'm sorry, what else, more frequently. I believe that as we move into what potentially could be a presidential election, and I'm not sold that doesn't get suspended by this current administration. But I do believe that our biggest fight, at least my front line, and it's why I talk about that a lot, is that front line is actually in that room with you right there, that questioning of whether or not you're worthy and capable of navigating this gauntlet of bias and racist systems. And I've never really interacted with the police, but now I have to defund them, and yes or no, or I don't know, what happens if my house is on fire? All of the alls, that this insecurity, you can do this. You find shoes on sale. You find really great deals for Disney cruises. You can figure this out. And so sometimes in my research for the book, there were a lot of folk who would say things like, well, I just don't know where to find the information. I'm like, are you kidding? You stalk your ex-boyfriend. Like, you are a professional detective. You get on that World Wide Web and you find something out about that sheriff. And then you text it to all of the parents in your kid's classroom. We can all do the work together.
And I can I stop you right there, because I think is a really important thing. Don't ask the Black people in your life to become your personal Google. You can Google anti-racism. You can Google what is systemic racism. What is like there's a burden that we have placed on the people in our lives, people of color in our lives, to explain this to me, when there's about 1 billion YouTube videos that explain it perfectly articulately. Right? So like, put in the work. Don't ask me. I literally got invited to write an article for a publication, and I wish I had the actual email because I don't want to misquote them. The assignment was, can you define diversity? Why is diversity hiring important? What are 3 ways that people that are hiring can connect and access Black professionals? And it was, be specific, give 3 to 4 points for each tip. I'm sorry, do I work there? Am I on staff? Right? Make sure that we're not transferring the work that we need to be doing onto the people that are literally in pain right now. Right. Literally physically in pain. So I think it's such a good point of, you are capable of doing this. You just have to find the will.
Yeah, you just got to do it. And then, Mary Lee, if I might, just because this is a question that I constantly get, and I want to make sure, because I do think it is one of the more turnkey solutions, which I know white ladies love the turnkey, how do I just do it, just tell me what to do thing, myself included, is I believe the Frontline very much for us is obviously, like I said, in that room with you, but in relationship with a lot of the other people in our families. And they're often referenced as the Uncle Bobs. Mine happens to be an Uncle Bob. And when a sly comment or a joke or I'm not going to vote because I don't like any of the candidates kind of comments happen, and those are the moments to really, step up and step into your value set and your value system, even though we've been raised and trained for centuries not to rock the boat, right? That's a performance, a perfection performance that some of us have been really molded and sculpted, and we do it very, very well. And so I find that in those moments that there are sort of 2 extremes of things that have to be dealt with straight away. When there is something urgent and dangerous that could cause harm, it needs to be pounced upon instantly, right? Like an Amy Cooper calling the police, right? You can't take your time with that one. So there's that, dealing with that. But what's happening a lot in white communities is people are doing a lot of calling out to demonstrate their level of wokeness, I believe, to really perform for themselves what they don't want to believe about who they actually are. But when somebody does say something that doesn't feel right, all you have to say is, that doesn't feel right to me. You don't have to show up with statistics about the GI Bill and inequality and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You can just lean in with that doesn't feel so good to me. I can't tell you why, but that doesn't feel quite right to me. I'm not sure. Do you think you have an idea why that might not be that great? Oh, calm down, Jenna. It's just and we've all gotten that. Calm down. It's just a joke. And so sometimes what I do on the ones that are not the Amy Cooper you have to deal with straight away, but the ones that are a little bit more like, was he making a passive comment? How did that really qualify? Sometimes I'll give it 15 minutes. Sometimes I'll give it a couple of hours, and sometimes I'll give it a day. I don't let it go beyond a day. And I'll call that person up and say, hey, Uncle Bob, you said something yesterday that just made me really uncomfortable, and I'm having a hard time figuring out why. I'm not showing up telling him that he's a racist, that he's homophobic, that he's a misogynist. I'm not showing up telling him that he's not behaving the way that he's led to believe that he isn't, right? That he's led to believe he's good. I'm inviting him into my challenge with the moment and inviting him to help navigate us through that, because he's going to come to his own conclusion. And then when he says, okay, you might be right, or if there's get over it, there's, my boss is a woman. Women have just as much power in our India as men. you can put down on you invite in. We have to call in. We have to stop ours. And so invite in.
Awesome.
Yeah. You know, we've gotten a couple of versions of this. I mean, what do you say to people who say they don't want to enter into these difficult conversations because they don't know enough or don't want to misspeak?
You're gonna misspeak. You're going to. This is a really difficult, turbulent time. It's a lot of movement. You don't know everything, but you know what's right. And I think like the courage of stepping up and allowing yourself to not be perfect. You might not get that exactly right. You might not. No one's gonna die because you didn't get this exactly right. Try, right? Like that's all I need. That's all I ask of people. And you know what's gonna help you try? If you listen. If you listen to the stories, if you listen to the people, just from hearing, I did a talk the other day, and I'm happy to share it with your group in the recap, of just walking through the stories from my perspective, from my view, right? And I have had people sharing it all over the internet, sharing it with their husband that won't listen, their uncle that won't hear, like there's something about hearing the stories from the person's mouth. Right? Listen, if you listen, then you're equipped. People that want the script and the checklist they're going to be caught flat-footed because there's no script for every situation. There's definitely a heart for every situation though. Right? And if you've listened, then you're equipped. And then I want to encourage us to be really careful. Don't study forever. Right? Because that's another avoidance technique, right? I'm studying the matter. I'm reading all the books. I'm listening to all the podcasts. You don't need to do all of that to open up your spaces and to be inclusive and to learn that Black person's name in your office you've never spoken to. And to like you don't need to wait until you've read all the books. That is substituting a perfection. Right? Substituting a perfection for this. So I think it's just, it's scary because it's not something that you normally do, but I promise you won't die. And if you want to be an ally, that's the minimum requirement. It kind of is the minimum requirement. And not everyone is cut out to be an ally, right? But I think it's really important to understand that if you have the privilege to be able to look away, and you do, you've made a choice and you're on the wrong side of history. So if you want to be on the right side of history, you're going to have to find just the basic courage to speak up. And I can't promise you it's going to always be pleasant. People are always going to receive you. People don't always receive me. It's not always pleasant for me, right? But it can't be any harder for you than it is for me, right? It can't be any harder. One of my favorite people. I love characters and stories. And if you remember the Starbucks incident where the two Black men were arrested for sitting in the Starbucks, and the guy that they were coming to meet shows up, and he's so upset. And he's like, what are you talking about? They're here to meet me. He was so like in the space and in the minute of, this is ridiculous. And he was the one that got the whole Starbucks to say, wait a minute, stop. What are you doing? Right? And now it became this big issue. Like, we have to show up. We have to have the courage. We have to find it. We have to find it, because if you don't find it, this doesn't move forward. There aren't enough of me. That's just the facts. I need you to find the stories, to find your voice, to find the courage, to push past the perfectionism, to push past the peacekeeping, the harmonizing role that we're kind of cast into, and step into this battle and step into this fray. And it's not always yelling and screaming. Sometimes it's a soft, gentle word. It's pulling someone to the side. You don't have to be, Norma Ray. It's all right. You can use the gifts that you have to be able to impact this issue. There's so many different sides of it. So I would challenge people to find that courage.
Yeah. systems change is daunting. We've gotten some comments about that, and some folks go immediately to legislation. Legislatively, is there anything that you feel particularly important is important right at this time, or is it more than that, right? That it's going to take to make the kind of change we need to see.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's legislatively being done and being worked on, and there are all kinds of great lists. And I'm hoping that people will lean in as those opportunities are presented. But I don't want that to be a substitute for you doing it in your world, right? Like, that's the thing. Like, there's something, again, that's an othering. Well, let's ban chokeholds. Right? And I want chokeholds to be banned. I don't understand why we're arguing about chokeholds. I don't think we should be disagreeing about that. But let's set that aside. That's great. It's great that we should, but people are still going to do chokeholds, and people are still going to, the issue is, are there going to be consequences when they commit these crimes? And am I going to get involved? Am I going to call and ask? Have I called my police department to understand, if a cop is doing something illegal, and the other cops see it, do they have to report it? Right? Like, call and ask those questions. What if 1,000 of us called and asked that question of our local police department? Hey, we better have a policy and communicate that. Like, there's so many places that you can touch this issue, and it's great for those things that are legislative and far away, but it's not a substitute for your actual life and the places that you can create a more welcoming environment for Black people. I was a commercial real estate broker. I was the first African-American, all top 10 firms in a 9-state region. And I had a executive vice president call me into his office and say, I like you, Denise. You're wicked smart. Truth is, you might be the smartest person in this office, but I gotta tell you, a Black person can't make it in this business. You should learn how to make the flyers and the banners. Everybody needs flyers and banners. That's a place where if 2 people in an office had stood up for me, if somebody had said something, I can't imagine like how I would have felt in that moment, right? So there's everyday opportunities. You know them when you see them. Look for them. Look for them and find them. So the legislative work, there are so many resources, there are so many lists. Challenge yourself to look for that, but also sweep your own front door.
That's right. That's right. And I think sometimes people get excited about this idea of like, oh, this is the action item. I'll pull the lever. I'll call the senator. I'll donate the money. I'll do whatever it is, like, because we are so desperate for that turnkey, like, oh, this is the right pathway forward. And I do want to invite us all in to recognize that there's going to be many, 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 many strategies to and I get a little bit religious when I say this word, but the salvation of us, right? There's not going to be just one exact pathway to do all this. Of course, our systems are broken. They were designed to very much keep only white Christian men in power. That's still the rule book we're following. Of course it's broken. The rules, the Constitution is working exactly as it was defined. There are exactly 0 pronouns, 0 mentioning women, 0. Of course we have a gender pay gap. Of course this country is the 10th most dangerous country in the world for women behind Syria, and bombs are being dropped on those homes because of domestic violence and because of our infant mortality rates. I mean, any number of reasons, because of our electoral college, because of all the disenfranchised voters that have no voice. Our Constitution is working. There's theorists that suggest we have to completely start over. There's people who think we just need to edit it. I always go back to the acronym of like, it's sort of like a house. Like, do you gut a house? Do you just renovate a room? I don't have the answers to it, but there are people who do. But this idea that like all you have to do is legislative is a real mail-in. It's a real mail-in.
And it's kind of like the black box, right? Like, people keep asking me, what do you think about the black box? And oh, what a failure. And what's the right thing to do? What's the wrong thing to do? The truth of the matter is, just do. We're going to have a universe of insufficient responses, inadequate actions. But my goodness, isn't that better than nothing?
And way we get home.
I'll take the confusion around the black square. I will charge it to your head and not your heart, right? Like that messages are going to be compromised. Things are going to be mishandled. Nobody's going to die of that. People will die of an action though. They will die of an action. So to me, if I've got to choose, I'd rather you open up your mouth and stick your foot right in it than never open up your mouth.
That's right.
Incredible. You know, the intersection of race and gender is something we've looked at a lot, not, certainly because of that being centered in our mission and for the mission of YWs across the country. And you've both touched on that in different ways tonight, both in certainly the impact of systemic racism on women of color, but also Jenna's notion of let's white and black women, let's come together here. There is something. Can you speak more to that and how we can make those connections and really leverage that?
I think there's a lot of space. There's a lot of distance, right? Because, I mentioned earlier the anger that I know I don't speak for all Black people, but there's an anger of, why don't white women understand this? You understand it when it's you. Hey, I'm coming into the situation. I'm walking into a room. I was raped. My lip is bloody. My hair is literally, my dress is torn. Blood is running down my leg. I'm telling you, I was raped. Well, were there any men in the room to confirm that you were raped? Well, what were you drinking? Do you have on a short skirt? Think of how those questions are infuriating. Is there any outfit that justifies raping me? No. But those same women who are crystal clear on that say, well, what happened before the video?
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. And I think that when we talk about feminism broadly, it's so important to understand that we have to be able to come together, and all the themes should be the same. The themes are exactly the same. We should be the strongest, most powerful, most dynamic allies. But we can't do that if we're in a power grab. We can't do that if we're trying to protect our proximity to power, right? I'm a step away. I can reach out. That's the Amy Coopers that I'm woke and I'm walking in the women's march, but I know I can call the man when I need the man to get me out of a situation, right? We have to relinquish that proximity to power to be able to really come together to work on these things. We know, I don't have to explain this to you. Like, we know, we live this firsthand as women. So we should be at the front line of these issues. Jenna mentioned earlier that the Constitution is working the way it was designed to work. We both had to get an amendment. We both needed an amendment, right? To be able to vote, to be able to be people, right? So we should be able to have complete solidarity on these things. And part of it is passing the mic, is sharing the space, is not shaping policy based on only your experience. And that's difficult. Somebody said to me, well, you can make it. I mean, we had a Black president. And I always say to them, like, there's always going to be an outlier. There's always going to be somebody who, can free dive 30 feet. Mm-hmm. But we still make scuba equipment. It doesn't matter that there's 1 or 2 or 3 people that squeak through. We still make scuba equipment because the rest of us are going to need a scuba tank to go down 30 feet. And I guess I think that the opportunity to work together, the opportunity to really understand and take the time to think about it. Like, Black women die having babies like a third world country in the United States of America. We should be in the streets over that. Why is that? Why? Let's dig into it. Let's figure it out. But instead, it's pushed to the side because it's not me, right? So I think that the intersectionality conversation is so critically important because we need to be 100% on the same side, rowing the boat in the same direction. And there is literally nothing that we cannot do There's nothing that we are incapable of doing if we can muster that. And how we started this conversation, I'll manage my anger and you manage your tears, and let's meet in the middle and let's fix this stuff, right? And intersectionality is important, but it's also, I keep going back to the basics of, if you lead with your heart, if your intention is true, if your real purpose is to help and encourage and support and make the world as good as you can make it in your span of influence, then you'll know how to show up, right? We know how to show up for our kids. If our child got a horrible illness tomorrow, we will have a PhD in that illness in about 2 months, because we know how to research and we know how to advocate, right? We know how to do it. So let's just do it. Let's push aside the excuses of why it's hard and why I'm scared and why it's difficult and what is it going to cost me, and let's just do it.
Jenna, hard to follow that. Do you want to add on to that? No,
I won't. My only closing sentence is, the only thing that is going to get between us and where it is that we all want to go is ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Fear.
Yeah. So how can I thank you again? Taking the mic tonight was our intention, and we're so grateful for your courage, your integrity, your beautiful minds, your beautiful hearts. Thank you so much for being with us this evening and sharing and taking that space for us and teaching us. I do want to tell everyone again, please buy this book that Jenna has written. And we're going to put up information about that in just a minute. You can follow Jenna on Twitter at Jenna Arnold, and follow Denise on Twitter at WatchHerWork TV. And of course, work with us locally, ywcagreenwich.org. And we will be in touch with you about what we will continue to do and will be doing going forward. So everybody stay healthy, stay safe, have a great evening. Again, ladies, thank you so much. Take good care.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.